Frostburg alum from 95, she's 95 and 01 alum. And she currently is an adjunct at University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, UPJ. Beautiful school, beautiful campus. We would like to just kind of start off with a few quick housekeeping things. If you can, please, everybody's been muted. If you could keep your mic muted. Anytime you want to make a comment or participate in the presentation, there will be areas, and we would like everyone to participate. Please enter your information into the chat, and I'll be relaying that to Kim as we go through. We'd like to also thank everyone on the Professional Development Committee who's made this possible. So we have Shannon Gribble and Brooke, who's filling in for her today. Very happy to have Brooke here. Tara Schother, Cindy Hay, Beth McClellan, and also Chris Everett. So we thank them for getting this all pulled together for FSU today. With that, I will let Kim get started.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me back. I just am excited because I am an alum from Frostburg. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is my journey and how Frostburg's education has helped me in my journey. As she said earlier, I am an alum. I have a bachelor's degree from Frostburg. I majored in English, and then I also have a minor in women's studies, which was intentional. It was through my own journey. And then I came back and finished my MBA to move forward in my career. In addition to that, I also have HR background. I've been in management more than 30 years in my career, and my MBA and my English degree have served me well. I must say, Frostburg education served me very, very well. I have been on a journey, and quite a successful journey. I have run 2 businesses and sold those. I have worked for state and federal government. I worked for state and federal government for many, many years. I worked for nonprofits. And in addition, I worked for corporate in New York. I did rep work in New York City. Then when my husband, who has been in higher ed, I'm a trailing spouse. I am follow him, and whatever job is available is when you drop yourself down in, you see what the market bears. So I ended up in higher education. It was a full circle. So I ended up in from private sector, public sector to higher education. And I've been teaching for about 15 years. I retired early, and I teach part-time for UPJ. But I have to say, my degree from Frostburg was my stepping stone to success. So kudos to Frostburg. The school was small enough that it gave me the support I needed, because at the time I was not, didn't have a lot of self-confidence. And the degrees and the process and the training that I received helped me in my work world, and also helped me as a woman, particularly in the workforce, especially in HR. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about accelerating the models, building role models for women in the workforce. It's always challenging. I think we all have our own stories, and we all have our own journeys, whether we're male, female, whatever. But I think sometimes we're going to focus on women. But there's a spin to this too, and I'll give you my own journeys along the way as well. So what we're going to do is we are going to talk about women in the workforce, and I'm going to talk about images of women in the workforce first. Then we're going to play a little bit of Jeopardy, which I do with my students quite frequently, even in a virtual setting. I found that this was really a way to teach content in a different way, because it engages people in a different way. It also tests your knowledge, So I'm going to play Alex Trebek today. And the last one, models for change moving forward. And we're going to have some suggestions. So we're going to tie this to your role in higher ed. So let's get started here. All right. This was just some clips and pieces that I pulled together. This is images of women in the workforce from 1940 to 2020. And I thought, interesting enough, let's take a few seconds to take a look at the images you see there and do a little bit of a reflection on that, if you don't mind. Okay. Quick question for everybody. Is there anything that really, when you take a look, it's just a collage of images. Is there anything that really stands out to you as we take a look? We have the 1950s in the middle. The upper left-hand corner is the 2020 model, which, if you take a look, is the pandemic model. Then we have, some stock images. We have the 40s. We have some other images of women. We have particularly, I like to take a look at the cartoon image there. You have a woman with a briefcase, but you also have a woman with a vacuum cleaner, which is interesting. So is there anything that anybody sees that really strikes them as, okay, have we made a lot of changes? Do we have a long way to go? Anything comment-wise, or is there anything that stands out to anyone?
There's some things coming through in the chat.
Okay.
I feel like the 40s women were seen as being more capable, but then it kind of went way in the opposite direction into the 50s.
Yeah.
I see women progressing as time goes on with their careers.
Interesting. The first comment about when the particular can photo in the U.S. Employment Service at the bottom, what that's referring to is wartime. So women, what they did, they basically went into the shops and did the jobs that the men did. And I agree, when they went into the shop, they felt like, hey, we can do this. We are capable. But what happened, you are very spot on with that, is basically what happened when men came back from war, then women were displaced. So women then were kind of pigeonholed and pushed back into that role of homemaker and mom in some ways. One of the things that I think I learned from my minor in women's studies there and the readings and etc. is that I didn't have to be pigeonholed into one or the other, but as someone said earlier, that seems to be what we sometimes have to do. We don't really see it as one or the other. We don't see it as jointly shared. For example, my husband and I are moving, and we are buying a place where all the maintenance is taken care of, all the outside maintenance. Like, he can get rid of the lawnmower, he can get rid of the snow blower, he can get rid of the weed eater, whatever. But me, I can't get rid of my internal pieces. So yeah, there are some challenges with that, and I would agree. Does anyone else have any other comments that they would like to make before we move to the next slide?
There was a comment, I appreciated you including women in male-dominated professions in these photographs. And then another participant said she agreed with that comment.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can see the progression of change. The one that's particularly interesting is the 1950s Guide to Women in the Workplace. So I remember my first job many years ago. Of course, I ran a business. I intended to do that because I could be my own boss. But basically, when you went into the workforce, and the way I was raised, but I won't tell you my age, but anyway, won't date myself here, but I was raised that to be silent and be a good little girl was what I was supposed to do. And I was raised that way. And that continued into my workplace as well. Um, and you'll see that kind of, take a look at the 50s photo there. It's kind of like, it's the image of being what, cute and probably quiet and complacent. And I think we all can kind of relate to that. Not as much for my daughter. I would say no. I raised her in a different way, and I also have a son. But she would not fit into this 50s model at all. I mean, she's been at corporate for many, many years. I would say she has not done that. So, okay, let's move on. All right. Okay, so 80 years of surviving the storm. Comment, what has changed? I think earlier I had a comment where uh, the images said that, women were in more in male dominated fields than previously. Years ago, you had what? You could be a nurse. My mom, that was her profession. You could be a secretary. There were certain fields that women weren't even allowed into: medicine, law, even business was kind of finance. How many of you've ever heard the old cliche, women are not good with numbers? That seems to be pretty typical when I was growing up. So what has changed? I'm going to divulge my own journey here a little bit. Well, what has changed? When I was in high school, and I went to a very small high school in a very small town America, uh, and this was back in, the 70s. I remember I wanted to take chemistry. I was picking my schedule and I wanted to take chemistry. And I met with a guidance counselor, and it just so happened that the guidance counselor was female. And I met with the guidance counselor and I said, I'd really like to take chemistry. And I hope no one's appalled with what I'm going to say, but when I reflect back on this, I think, oh mercy, this is interesting. The guidance counselor said to me, you don't need to take chemistry. You're just going to get married and you're going to have children. There's no need for you to take a chemistry course. Now I ask anybody else, has anybody else had an experience like that over the years? Or has it changed? Maybe, hopefully, it has. Or most people, I'd say don't realize it happens sometimes. Does anybody else have any experiences that they would like to share?
We have some things coming through chat. One person said, yep, I was told I wouldn't make it through the police academy because I was a woman and it is a man's field. Let's see, I started out as the only female engineering major, and the professor walked up to me at the first class and told me that if I needed help, he would give me the number of the only other female in the department.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. So there are still, yeah, everybody still has those journeys somewhat, right? Yeah. So in addition to that, with the guidance counselor, I will tell you when I was in, middle school, I had a teacher and, anybody remember long division, So I would get real nervous if I couldn't grasp a concept. I still have an issue with that. So I have to work hard at things. I'm not your typical academic, even though I've gone through 20 years of schooling and have the credentials. I had to work at it. I'm not one that can just, easily grasp those concepts, which is always good because I share that with my own students. So I had the experience with long division, and I would, carry down and move the numbers around, and then I would kind of get all emotional and caught up that I couldn't finish the process. And I had a teacher at the time who walked the aisles, and it made me more nervous. I have to tell you, it made me so nervous because I couldn't, it was like I knew he was going to look over my shoulder. So we went through that for about a week, and I froze up one day, and he stood by my desk and just stared down at my paper. And I can remember he had his fist and took his fist and hit the side of the desk, which almost brought me to tears. And he said, "Girls aren't good in numbers. They're just not." And I've never forgotten that. And I carried that clear up through my academic career. But then I realized, wait a minute, I can do this. I can run a business, and I ran it very successfully. And I also have made profit very successfully over the years. So, but I had to let go of that voice, so to speak. Anybody else have any others that they would like to share?
There's a comment that says, it was unusual to be a female in the television production field when I entered it in a technical position.
Oh, wow. I would, yes.
And I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's another one that said, I wanted to take shop one year and was told no. My father-in-law told me I would have challenges being a software developer because I would be working with all men.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I would share from my own experience when I was in middle school and high school. I had a teacher that they painted this great big pig on his door, and it said male chauvinist pig.
Oh,
and that was in the 80s, and that was okay. I also had a science teacher who made all the girls stand up at their desks, and his name was Mr. Brogley. And if you wanted your Bunsen burner lit, you had to sing, "Come on, Brogley, light my fire." So things have changed. That would never be okay now.
Absolutely. And thank goodness, folks. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. And it's interesting enough, we as educators, when we have those experiences, the one thing that I said, and there was three things in my life that kind of happened. Due to that, I said I'd never do that if I got in a classroom. I also had management experiences that were similar because I was under different managers, and probably one of the absolute most incompetent managers I was under was female, to be honest with you, because she wasn't supportive of anything. She just had anger issues. And I always said if I got into management, I'd never do that either. So yeah, I think we all have our journeys too. Yes, absolutely.
We have one more quick comment on this topic. At my last job, oh wait, there's more coming in. At my last job, when I announced I was getting married, I was asked if I was going to quit. Another one, my mom in the early 70s was required to leave her job when she got pregnant.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
In 2016, my new resident to Utah, my daughter and I had all the staff and advisors say to her, "Oh my goodness, you were in the honors math? Wow." We both recognize it as in that culture environment, women were not offered these statements.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do think it has changed, folks. I do. I mean, based on my daughter and even my son's role, who straddles across the board, interesting how it has changed. The influences of, well, legislation, law, but also I think parenting has a lot to do with it as well. So we talked about what has changed, and I think there has been changes. I think there are still things that are challenges. So if you were to say, what would you say were some of the primary challenges that women still face that are probably the biggest hurdles, particularly now? Let's focus on even the pandemic, even the text changes. Technology's made it easier, but let's just say, but what are the challenges with technology for women? Particularly, let's just focus on women in the workforce. Anybody want to make a comment on that one?
While we're waiting for some chats to come through,
Mhm.
I would say that if you're a strong, assertive, intelligent female in the workforce, you can be labeled as aggressive or the B word, which I obviously won't say. It gets twisted. I think a lot of times a male with that personality moves up, a female with that personality gets labeled.
Absolutely, and that still does happen. Absolutely, absolutely. Yep. Let me throw out one to you. What are the challenges? And this is after 30 years of in the workforce at corporate, state, higher ed, et cetera, et cetera. The challenges that I still see, and I don't mean to sound, and I'm not stereotyping, and I'm not saying one size fits all because it doesn't necessarily. And I will say, based on my own experiences and based on some statistics over the years, I will just say that this is a personal one for me. For me, the big challenges for me being female and a professional, in management and also, as an administrator or whatever, the challenges for me were lack of support by other female colleagues. That has been my huge, huge hurdle. I would not be or I would have not had the opportunities I had if it were not for two male role models that I had in my career. One of those who was an appointee from a political appointee, had been in the system for 34 years, saw my talents and gave me an opportunity. But along the way, gave me an opportunity and gave me supports that I needed to go through a system that was kind of dominated by not only politics, but by his some of his colleagues, and he knew that. So he was very supportive in that. In the second part, when I went into higher ed, I was hired by a female at a third of the salary as my male colleagues. And I went somewhere else and they recruited me back to my old job by a male. He was the leader. He was my male mentor. He brought me back, he brought me back in salary and brought me back into administration and made up for the salary that I should have been receiving prior to that. He was a Secretary of Labor for many years here. So I owe those pieces to two males, believe it or not, that saw talent and said, "You can do this." And they believed in me and gave me the opportunity, but I had to prove myself along the way, and I worked hard to do that as well. So, what are some of the challenges for others that they've experienced, or maybe there isn't any, but I would say I figure there are.
There's one couple now. There's one in the chat: being spoken to by men in higher positions in a condescending manner.
Oh, yeah.
There's another. Go ahead.
Okay, so without opening up the floor, so how would you handle when you are in that position of being spoken to condescendingly? Does anybody, have any suggestions on how you would facilitate that. Or as I say, sometimes you have to really pick your words carefully sometimes along the way. So anybody want to chime in? How would you handle that when you're spoken to condescendingly by, and it does happen quite frequently.
Hi, this is Lisa. It has happened to me, and I just try to maintain a very professional tone and answer them, or just try to ignore that that's what they did, because especially if it's in a meeting, and that's where I've experienced it when there are other people around. If it was one-on-one, I would take a very different stance, but in a meeting where there are other people, I've just maintained my professionalism and tried to move the meeting forward and then dealt with it after the fact.
Yeah. One of the things that I use sometimes, and I'll just throw this out for everyone, because I've had it happen to me quite frequently, more times than I can say. Sometimes what I do is I do it, I reflect back, and I'll say, I do hear what you're saying. I do hear what you're saying. So the person then, it's kind of like they start backing away, and I do hear what you're saying. But, and then usually I'll segue into, but this may be another way to present that, or this may be another viewpoint, So those are things. I always put it back to in even when you're with HR pieces, sometimes you'll have angry employees. So you place it back and you hear what they say. And then they have to stop for a second and think about what they've said as well, too. Anyone else have any other challenges?
There's a chat that says, I've never had a woman boss in my field, always men. I've also had several instances, even recently, that men made my work life difficult because they made less money than me, even though I had much more experience.
Oh, okay.
And also bringing up an idea in a meeting and being ignored, basically, and then a man says the same thing later, and it's like it's the first time anybody's hearing it.
Oh, these are so familiar, folks. They are. So what do you, when it is your idea and it's not validated, sometimes what you can do, or what I've done in the past, is I always say, I don't care who gets credit for this, as long as we move forward for the common good. And sometimes that kind of puts it out there a little bit, but without calling someone out. But I don't care who gets credit for it. And wow, that's a familiar one too. You can have great ideas. Also, many of us, I think, probably have worked really, really hard and not, again, given the credit for what we do along the way. But it does happen. It does. And we just have to sometimes rise above and make sure that that you're always professional. The one thing that I've learned about from Frostburg with my minor in women's studies, and I took this away after reading and seeing, the history of women. The one thing that I had to go through and I had to really pull together as I went into management is that things do happen, and they happen across both genders. But the one thing that I really realized with because I use a hyphenated name too, which sometimes on a resume causes tension. But I had to kind of say, get rid of the us and them and the anger, and how do we bring it forward in a different way. And I know that sounds very difficult, because I've been in those situations too, where you think, wow, this is not fair. I've been hired for less, I can tell you that. And what do you do with it? You need your job, so you don't say anything. And sometimes you can't say things. People say, well, I would take the HR or whatever, but sometimes you can't. because those are the challenges, because then you're labeled sometimes, and I'm sure we've all had that experience. Anybody else have that fear of being labeled if you say anything along the way? Any comments on that? It's the teacher in me. I always have to ask questions. You could tell I'm a teacher. I always have to ask questions. But yeah, there are challenges, folks. There still are. But never ever forget that the only way we make change is to educate. And education is the biggest key to making change. So where you are in higher ed, you are the key to change. And I cannot say enough about that. Higher ed made all the difference in my career and my life. Without that, I don't really know what I would have done. It opened doors that even though there are some that still are closed, it gives me that tool. So education, education, education. So let's move on. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to play Jeopardy. All right. This ties into women in the workplace, and it was a real learning experience for me because I got all caught up in the research. And when I got all caught up in the research, I got so excited that pretty soon I had like 45 or 50 Jeopardy questions, and I said, this can't happen. We only have an hour. So anyway, so what we're going to do right now, I'm going to play Alex Trebek. I do this with my students. This is a great tool that you can use in any classroom, even through management trainings. You can do this as well, and it gets people kind of interacting, rather than me lecturing or whatever. So the first category that we're going to talk about is invention. Now, with that said, how many women are ever encouraged to invent? It's not something that, somebody sits around and says, oh, you should become an inventor. Even though we have great skills because we solve problems every day, we use machinery every day, we use technology every day, we critically think with our children every day, or our parents or our colleagues, whatever the situation. Sometimes if you think, stop and think, what, if we had a tool that we could do X, Y, and Z, I'm sure many of you even had that happen in your own life. So the first one, we're going to take a trip back in time here. And what I'm going to ask you to do is post in the chat room. I'm going to ask you not to look up online. This is what I do with my students, and I know they'll do it, is don't look up online, but do your best at guessing. And maybe some of you know. And believe it or not, I ran a catering business and I owned a bakery. And to be honest with you, till I started doing the research on this, I did not know the answer to this question. So the first question, name the famous American chef who invented the chocolate chip cookie. I mean, how many of us have had a chocolate chip cookie? I mean, everyone. So I'm going to ask you to post in the chat box who you think it is. Name the famous American chef who invented the chocolate chip cookie.
We have some comments coming in. Do you want me to read them?
Yeah.
Mrs. Fields.
Okay.
I have her original cookbook, Ruth Wakefield Whole House. Ruth Wakefield, I saw on a TV show the other day.
Okay.
I was going to say Betty Crocker.
Betty Crocker. Okay. Any others come in?
So far, that's all I see.
All right. So, bingo. Ruth Grace Wakefield. And she is the Toll House cookie person. So she has an interesting background. It was home economics, and she's from Massachusetts, and they own the Toll House Inn. So she was a dietitian. You know, who would have known that? I didn't even know that. Like I said, I ran a bakery, owned a bakery, and I did not know this. I did not. So I thought this was a rather interesting piece. So, all right, let me go back one. If I can go back. All right, so we're going to go back. And the next, I put two in here because invention intrigued me, as well as everything else did. So I had to kind of screen out because, like I said, I got real caught up in the research piece. Who invented the first home security system? Now, this is a US, I should have put US in there. But who invented the first home security system? Does anybody know that? Anybody posting?
Nothing yet.
This is a tough one. Like I said, some of these I had no idea. And I have a minor in women's studies. And I was like, wow, this is really neat. You know, anybody posting?
Mm-mm. You're stumping them.
Yeah, because it's one of those hit the buzzer piece because it's like time is up. All right. So this was an interesting one as well. This is the person who invented the first home security system. She was from Queens, New York. She lived in an area where there was a high crime area. This was back in 1966, folks. So what she did with her partner, they applied for an invention patent on a closed circuit TV system, and that's basically the forerunner for the home security system. So she was the one who invented it. And basically, I did not know that. So she basically was the person who set this into motion. So I'm sure no one else knew that either. She set up 4 peepholes and a camera, you know, remote. She was way ahead of her time. I had no idea. So how many of you have security systems and even knew that it was a woman that discovered the first home security system? Anybody? So these are really little like nuances or little tidbits that even like sometimes if I would put this out in front of my students, even today, this would be a great dialogue, I can tell you. It would be among the males even as well in my classroom. So, all right, so let's move on. Let's move on to medicine, okay? Who developed a staggering 45 patents? And if anybody knows anything about patents, that's huge, including drugs to combat leukemia, herpes, AIDS, and treatments to reduce the body's rejection of foreign tissue in kidney transplant between related donors. In other words, somebody has a kidney transplant, you know, the rejection rate's high. This person, you know, was the treatment, discovered the treatment or the injection to help, you know, donors and recipients with, you know, to overcome the rejection piece. So anybody want to guess at this one?
We have a Marie Curie in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
I should say, who is Marie Curie?
Framed. Yeah. Anybody else?
So far, that's it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Nobody really I didn't know this. Like I said, I mean, I've had such fun with this because it's just been just such a fun piece. So here we go. It's Gertrude. She won a Nobel Prize for innovative methods of rational drug design, which focused on the understanding of target of drug rather than simply trial and error. She's coming from a scientific background. Interesting enough, she pursued her career in medicine when her grandfather passed away from cancer when she was 15. So she became dedicated to discovering the cure for the disease. I think that is, I mean, you can read more about her, but I mean, I just took this little tidbit and put it up here for the purposes of briefness. But 45 patents, wow. This lady, she had to spend all her time in the lab. I mean, salute to her, you know, but no one knew that. So we know those, like somebody mentioned Madame Curie earlier, we know those are typical, but I think the whole purpose of maybe even bringing this up with the Jeopardy piece is that we connect even further and make deeper connections to women in fields of science, math, and technology too, particularly for, you know, people majoring now in fields that are not in, you know, I mean, we now have the opportunity to major in those fields, which is great. So let's move on. All right, science. Let's go into science. Identify the neuroscientists recognized for studies of the brain, particularly the frontal lobes, and how it relates to memory. This person did a lot of work on Alzheimer's, dementia, and if anybody's ever been touched with either one of those diseases, oh mercy, it is a journey, folks, for a loved one. It is quite a journey. So, anybody have a guess who that is?
I don't see anything coming through yet.
Okay. That's why these are stumpers. Because I mean, the field, you know, unless you just research this, it'd be tough to have that, you know, trivia stuff. It really would be. Anybody?
Nothing.
Okay. So let's go to the slide. So here we go. A woman. Guess what? Neuroscience, Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences, MIT, folks. So she's a leading scholar. As I said earlier, Parkinson's also, which affects the neuro pathways as well, amnesia. Think about that. I mean, she's made such great contributions, but not really anybody would know. MIT, quite impressive, you know, quite impressive. Like I said, if anybody's ever had the experience with Alzheimer's or dementia or anything like that with a family member, how important this is that we have somebody who studied that, and particularly a woman in a science field too. All right. Okay, let's move on. All right, my favorite topic, because, you know, I love business. Okay. So reported to be worth over, now this is US dollars, 1.8 billion, not million, billion, due to stock holdings in Facebook and other companies. Does anybody know who this is? And this is more.
I'm getting a lot of chats here on this one.
Okay.
We have guessing it's Sheryl Sandberg with the Facebook hint. One of my role models, Sheryl Sandberg, I love her quote. I want every little girl who's told she's bossy to be told instead she has leadership skills. Amen to that. Jeff Bezos' ex-wife.
Oh, okay.
Another Sheryl Sandberg, a Kardashian, and Melinda Gates.
Okay. Well, you have some people that are spot on and correct on this, so I am thrilled beyond thrilled. Sandberg. So she's a little newer in, she, especially like someone said earlier, the Facebook is a giveaway on with her, but stellar performer. I mean, stellar. In 2012, she was named in Time 100, the annual list of most influential people in the world. So this is what your students would love to hear, because like as a little girl, I grew up in an all-girl family. This would have been something that would have thrilled me to death. I mean, I would be like, oh, wow, look, so, look what she can do. But it was a different time then. But being worth 1.8 billion, that's significant, So she's stellar. I mean, chief operating officer of Facebook. So yeah. So that was
I'll shout out to the people who got it right. I should have done that on the cookie one too.
yeah.
Michelle Hickson knew it, Lisa Sesnick, and Whitney Lamont.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. What?
Michelle Hickson, Lisa Sesnick, and Whitney Lamont all got this one right.
All right.
Shout out to them.
Yeah. And you win. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's go next. All right. So this one may be a little more obscure. And some of these are a little less under the radar, which kind of makes it a little more challenging for people. So this last one is technology, and we're going to back up on this one a little bit. Who at National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics and developed and implemented code which led to the development of the batteries used in hybrid cars? Does anybody know who started that process? So this is technology and code. And this should be a happy place for women. So it's code, technology, and discovering the batteries used in hybrid cars. That's a significant contribution.
I have Annie Easley.
Exactly.
She worked at NASA for years. That's Lisa Sesnick.
Bingo, that person is correct. Anybody else chime in? All right. Kudos to that person for knowing that too. So basically, here you go. She was born in 1933 in Birmingham, Alabama. She went to Xavier, and guess what? She majored in pharmacy for 2 years. So shortly after that, she married and moved to Cleveland, Ohio, which it says her life changed for the better. Since there were no pharmaceutical schools nearby, she applied for the job at the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. Within 2 weeks, she'd started working there. So basically, she was one of 4 African Americans who worked there and developed and implemented code, which led to the development of the batteries used in hybrid cars. So, wow. And just, I mean, wow. When I look at this, I go, wow. So overcome probably many, many obstacles, I would guess. So a lot, as we all have, whatever our journey is. All right. Okay. So that is my conclusion to Jeopardy. So we're going to move on. As I said earlier, we're going to talk about moving forward and how we implement change. And I'm going to talk about particularly in the areas of higher education. And there are other areas, we could, implement change in as well. So here we go. And these are a few connections that I made. And then I'm going to open up the floor. and we'll talk about other things that possibly could be used for change. These are what I call subtle changes we make. We don't realize we're doing it. We're not pushing a major agenda, but they're subtle changes. So one of the things that I would do if this, if I wanted to really kind of connect something together, or especially as an educator, every week I'd include a connection to women in the workplace into the curriculum. Okay. Somehow, I mean, you could do it in science, you could do it in English, you could do it across all curriculum. Because every, as I showed you earlier, there's contributions in every field from women. And I think connecting those role models is critical within, the context that changes the way we look at it. Okay. You could also provide opportunities for students to teach a segment on famous women in STEM programs. Okay, so for example, if you wanted to implement something in a classroom, you could have maybe your students, I call it a flipped classroom, and I use it quite frequently. I flip the classroom and I say to the students, you need to pick a week, or you need to pick a day, or whatever, one day, just one day, that you teach a segment on women in STEM, or women in science, or women in technology, or whatever. And I'm not saying in the classroom it's just the women who do this. It is your entire classroom who do it. So you could use that to connect in the classroom. Also, because I came out of a data gathering world when I worked for the feds, this could also be a springboard to use for a grant proposal for your institution as well. So in other words, you have across maybe various curriculum within Frostburg, you have different lead teachers who are going to take the lead on this, maybe your departments. And then basically what you can say is, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do so many of this and so much of that in each field. And then you collect the data, and then over time, you might want to, how it connects to those programs, who exited your university and ended up in STEM programs or whatever. But just a hint that data, I mean, it sounds easy to do, but you can start, by collecting that data. The other one that I would suggest would be play Jeopardy with students, or let's add, I should have added, play Jeopardy maybe if you're in HR, or you're in management, or you're in maybe another administrative piece. You might want to play Jeopardy with your employees on certain things that tie into maybe some training you're doing or something that you're doing. I mean, you might have to reach a little bit to get that to pull together, and it may not fit everything, but I would say with employees as well. The other one, particularly when we talk about enrollment, because I was responsible for enrollment within my field and in my department. One of the things that I would suggest is that, you have a lead in your department, and maybe reach out to area high schools and have a speaker series, but it would be your students who do it. And they would go in with permission from, the superintendent or the high school or whomever, and maybe even go further, rather than just high school, go into middle school and even elementary school, because the kids love when college students come in. They love that. The little ones love it. So connect to the school districts and have your students present maybe women in STEM programs or women opportunities for that, which also leads into, visits on campus, et cetera, et cetera. My doctorate's in marketing, so I can't help but throw that out so that, it also creates change. It particularly, even helps change within the local school districts for, women in STEM programs as well. So the last one, the last two that I'll throw out, and then I'm going to open up the floor to you, is to create awareness in state federal legislation that provides support such as childcare. So what I'm talking about here is, how do you create new ways to support women in probably non-traditional fields, because sometimes they have to work longer hours, or with technology that has changed the way we work, and separating how, we don't have childcare within our home, but how do we provide supports for that legislation and change to happen within, how do we support women in the workforce or women in non-traditional fields as well. And then the last one, study private and public sector human resource policies, and how maybe those can be, if particularly if you're at corporate, how can you maybe help shape internal policies that will help women, particularly when they juggle sick children, all those things that women encounter. And sometimes those screen women out of fields, or screen women out of being able to climb, the ladder or support systems. And those are some that I've seen over my career as well. So I've done enough lecturing. So I'm going to open up the floor and ask for ideas from you, regardless of what sector, whether you're not in the classroom, or you're, maybe HR, or you're administrative, or whatever. How would you infuse anything that you would say would be supportive of women in the workplace?
Can they just take themselves off mute if they want to do it that way, since we're towards the end?
Yes, absolutely. I have a hard time with the mute thing sometimes too.
So yeah, just speak up, anyone, if you have some thoughts. One thing in chat says, these are great suggestions. There was a fantastic organization in Salt Lake named Real Women Run, which worked to encourage women to join boards and run for elected office.
Ooh.
I want to learn and see if similar organizations already created in Maryland. So that's great.
Very good suggestion. Very good. Yes, absolutely. To change. Oh my, yeah, very much so. Yes. Anyone else?
I don't see anything else coming in right now. I know we are running up on the hour.
Okay.
So if if you have to jump off right now, please, feel free. But we'll go another couple minutes. Okay, we got another chat come through. A required workshop for men only to instruct them on ways they might be being sexist without realizing it. I think a lot of it is just a lack of awareness.
Education. Education. Yeah, absolutely.
And we got a liked the training. Thank you. Fun and engaging. I agree.
Thank you.
This was great. Thanks for the information. And another thank you. Great job, Kim.
Oh, that's so nice. It's nice to come back home.
Well, we'd like to definitely, I'm sure all of you, thank Kim for coming and presenting. We will definitely try to get her back again if possible. And at this time, if I'll let Kim make any closing remarks and we can end the session.
Okay. Well, as I said earlier, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for my Frostburg education. I can't say enough, and for the job you do and continue to do. So I'm blessed that you gave me the opportunity. Thank you.
Tons of thank yous coming through the chat.
All right.
Everybody really seems to have liked it. Okay, well, at